Habit number 13, the Sabbath. Well, here we are, the final habit, the one I told you that wasn't an option but mandatory. If the previous habits were akin to chopping wood and building a cabin, the Sabbath would be like having food to eat in that cabin. It's a must, otherwise there's no point to the cabin. I will preface everything in this section with the following important information. I have an entire series on the Sabbath that covers important and fascinating history in the last 2,000 years, as well as why the Sabbath is important for our generation, which is what we will discuss briefly here. I also explore the Sabbath in many of my writings and podcasts, and my eschatological or end times related materials total 5 series with over 140 hours of content that is relevant to this topic, all free to watch and educate yourself on. My book, The Way Home, has a chapter on the importance of the Sabbath and developing a connection to God and a habit of prayer, and the Dance of Life devotional has a chapter on the Sabbath and the Gospel, as well as other related content. I will be discussing points from all of these works, but know also that this book isn't going to be an exhaustive or even detailed defense of these ideas. I highly encourage you to take my invitation and learn the truth on this topic because many are deceived on it. So, with that out of the way, why is the Sabbath mandatory for your practice of gratitude and for living a God-centered life? Isn't the Sabbath just for the Jews? Isn't keeping the Sabbath a legalistic burden? Didn't Jesus change the Sabbath to Sunday? What if Jesus is our Sabbath rest now, and as long as we believe, then every day is a Sabbath? These are all common objections that I hear and deal with every time I discuss this topic, and sadly it's because we are at the end of time and deception has reached a maximum. The book of Revelation warns that the final phase of the church is the lukewarm church, and it will be characterized by deception, false prophets, false teachers, fables, people having the appearance of godliness, religion, and a counterfeit salvation that people will embrace because they did not love the truth. This is our current generation, and that's because the return of Jesus, I believe, is in our lifetime. When exactly it'll happen, I don't know. But as to whether history is ending soon, I am certain it is. That's a pretty profound statement for most people, so I will invite you to check the resources previously cited on my website in the Bible Studies section, and you can decide for yourself based on the evidence. But what does this have to do with the Sabbath? To understand the connection between Jesus' return, what he warned us about right before his return, and the meaning of the Sabbath, we have to understand what the Sabbath is. Contrary to what many people believe, the Sabbath is not just for the Jews. The Sabbath is part of the 10 Commandments, which are eternal and a reflection of God's unchanging moral character. Rest is what only God provides, because he is the source of life and being. The Sabbath was actually the first of the 10 Commandments ever to be commanded and enforced. Did you know that? In the very beginning of Genesis, the first thing Adam and Eve did was follow the commandment to rest, entering reality through the Sabbath and resting with God on the 7th day. This was intentional, as a symbol of the salvation of mankind and the glorious ending we can look forward to when Jesus returns. In some way, it was also the first picture of the gospel, even before the gospel was announced in Genesis 3 verse 15. As God says in Isaiah 46, 8-11, he declares the end from the beginning, and this is why he is God. There are other pieces of evidence scripturally that the Sabbath was continued by Adam into future generations of believers, with the Sabbath being given yet again to the Israelites in the wilderness before Mount Sinai, then written into stone on the tablets. I discussed these pieces of evidence in my series, but for now it's important to note that the tablets themselves were placed inside of the ark, while the book of the ordinances was placed outside of the ark. Everything that God does is intentional, so this separation shows which is eternal, morality, and which is passing away, the ordinances. So the Sabbath is not just for the Jews because the Sabbath was given to mankind from the very beginning. Even Jesus confirms this in Mark 2 verse 27, where he reminds us that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Many erroneously take this to mean that keeping the Sabbath is legalism, and Jesus is arguing for some sort of freedom of expression as to how you interpret this moral command. But this isn't the case because Jesus is God and God doesn't change. Neither does his morality, and that means if we believe killing, stealing, adultery, lying, idolatry, and coveting are still wrong today, then so is ignoring the command to rest intentionally on the 7th day as a sign of who you trust in to provide for you and to redeem you. The Sabbath is a unique commandment in many ways. It is the only commandment that begins with remember, because God prophesied through Daniel that the Antichrist power would change the times and laws. That's Daniel 7 verse 25. Every king in history has had their own laws and calendars, so this is not stating the obvious. It is stating that the final Antichrist power would change God's laws and times, and this has been fulfilled by the papal institution of the Roman Catholic Church. The Catholic Church has openly bragged that the mark of its authority has been to transfer the solemnity of the Sabbath from the seventh day to the first day, and several papal documents describe the power of the Pope to dispense with God's laws, which of course is not true because God himself is the only one who has the power to change the law, yet he will never change his moral laws because God doesn't change. The Sabbath is also the command that has the most amount of content out of the Ten Commandments when it is given. In other words, God spends the most amount of time out of all of the commandments in describing this command, which is significant. Throughout the Old Testament, we see a continual complaint against the Israelites, that they forsook God's Sabbath, and this led to their judgment, which, interestingly, was also on a Sabbath. Poetic justice for not trusting in God to be your provider and your redeemer. Another important aspect to the Sabbath is that it is the identifier that links the moral code to the one who gave the moral code in the first place. This part is very important to understand. Every power in history has had laws against killing or stealing or bearing false witness. All Antichrist powers have also enforced exclusive worship, like Nebuchadnezzar forcing people to bow down to his golden image, or the Catholic Church forcing people to acknowledge the supremacy of the Pope, who is considered to be the presence of God on earth. In this sense, every one of these powers has had their own laws on exclusive worship, just like the first two commandments given by God regarding exclusive worship of Him. So then what makes a set of laws different from another set? Morality is relatively universal because God gave us a conscience, and also because morality in general keeps society prosperous and stable. But obeying a government's moral laws, like not killing or stealing, does not necessarily mean you're obeying God. You are obeying the lawgiver of these laws, and while most governments today base their laws on the Ten Commandments, they each have their own version of what is moral or legal. Sometimes, what is legal is not moral, and what is moral is not always legal. In fact, the Bible warns of this exact conflict at the end of the age. The Antichrist power will legislate a particular morality, and those who refuse to obey this law will be persecuted. So understanding who you are obeying is very, very important. Obedience was the test in the beginning with the Garden of Eden. It was the test throughout time, and it will be the test at the very end. It is not about perfect moral performance, but rather obedience because of faith. All of the faithful, who are highlighted beautifully in Hebrews 11, modeled obedience out of faith in God. They were all sinners, and none of them had perfect moral performance. Yet they were righteous in God's eyes because they obeyed out of faith. This has always been the issue, and my claim is that the Sabbath will be at the center of the coming conflict of obedience. Sadly, most will fail the test that is on the horizon, so I hope that you will not be one of them. Nevertheless, the importance of the Sabbath is that it identifies God as the giver of the law. Every empire in history has had moral laws. The Catholic Church has its own version of the Ten Commandments, changed by the authority of the Pope and with a different prescription for the day of rest. So, how do you know who it is you're obeying when you're acting morally? How do you know the source of your morality? This is something most people don't think about or even realize, but the answer lies in the Sabbath. Because the Sabbath is part of the commandments as a whole, and the Sabbath is prescribed in such a way as to honor the Creator of the universe, you shall rest on the seventh day because God made the heavens and the earth in 6 days and rested on the seventh, then the Sabbath is the unique identifying signature that anchors the other 9 commandments in the authority of God, who is the Creator of the universe. God is also the provider and the redeemer, the same God who died on the cross and rested on the seventh day in the tomb to save you from the judge, who is also the same person. This is why the Sabbath is so important. It is the key that identifies your obedience to God and not to any other moral authority posing as God. That is why God calls it a sign between Him and His people, many times in Scripture. Interestingly, the times when this is mentioned explicitly describe the sign to be as frontlets between the eyes and as a mark on the hand, symbols of both actions and intentions to be aligned to God through obedience. Yet at the same time, we see the Antichrist power enforcing its own mark of obedience, which can be either on the hand or on the head, a symbol of believing in the delusion or going along with it out of fear of persecution or desire for benefits. So then the Sabbath is of utmost importance. We are not saved by keeping the Sabbath. We keep the Sabbath because we are saved. There's nothing more that I look forward to each week than the seventh day, which is different from all the rest, and which allows me time to go out in nature, be mindful, pray more, read the Bible more, listen to edifying content more, and practice everything that I've outlined for you in the previous 12 habits. It is a delight to rest mindfully with God, reminding yourself of the promises of the gospel and of our glorious future. I do not keep it perfectly, and I probably never will, because the world we live in is 24/7, and I'm not perfect either. But there's grace for that, and that's what matters. The Sabbath was a gift given to man, and its fullest meaning was revealed through Jesus Christ. This is the true meaning of Jesus fulfilling the Sabbath. Now that God's nature, character, and word have been fully revealed, we understand with totality what it means to rest on the seventh day and why it was so important to God all of those thousands of years, because it is a physical expression of the gospel. As God rested on the seventh day, so too did Christ rest on the seventh day after completing his work of salvation. As God saved a people from slavery and commanded them to rest in the wilderness as a sign of his provision, so too did Jesus save us from this dying world and commands us to find rest in him through faith until we get to the promised land. But many take this last part to mean that every day becomes the Sabbath, which of course is nonsense. If every day were the Sabbath, then the Sabbath would have no meaning, nor would you be able to work. Those who exercise faith and find spiritual rest in Christ also take the seventh day to rest from their labors, because they know that Christ will provide. It is a physical expression of a spiritual alignment. James says that faith without works is dead, and one of the timeless ways that we can show our faith is by resting intentionally the way that God prescribed, so that by our actions we show who we trust. The Sabbath is also designed to be a placeholder for eternity, a snapshot or a preview of the eternal age of constant rest, joy, and the fullness of the presence of God. What a delight, and yet so many people fight against this precious truth and make it a burden in their mind. Yet the Sabbath is and always was a moral command, and it is a very precious thing to God. Judgments in the past were on the Sabbath, and I believe Jesus will also return on a Sabbath, whenever that one may be, to judge the world. Those who will find rest in Christ will be tested in these final days, and they will reject the coming legislated morality, which will demand rest on the day of the sun, and they will be persecuted as a result. But in rejecting this Antichrist system and its invitation to acknowledge it as the Redeemer, Creator, and Provider, they will affirm the true gospel and align with Christ and be saved. Those who ignore these important warnings will accept the counterfeit, and as a result, reject God's command, the one he expressly begins with, remember, and so in turn reject the gospel, because they will find rest, provision, and trust in the counterfeit lawgiver. These are heavy things and certainly a much different tone than the rest of this journey, but they must be articulated. You must learn the truth about the Sabbath and learn to walk the narrow road between the dialectic of legalism and permissivism. On one side, you have the legalists who make it a burden, and on the other side, you have people who think it has nothing to do with them, despite Jesus saying that it was God's gift to man, and Paul saying that the gifts of God are irrevocable. That's Romans 11, verse 29. So do not reject this message, but learn instead and establish this habit for yourself. I promise you that it will become more and more meaningful as time goes on, and it will also be the foundation for the rest of the habits you commit to. The Sabbath has changed my life, and I know that it will change yours too. The end is also coming, and those who ignore these things will be deceived and destroyed. So learn the truth and tell others as well, because unlike the other habits, this one is of utmost consequence. For support on the Sabbath, please visit danceoflife.com and check the Bible Studies section for the Sabbath series. You can also email me with your questions at tudor@danceoflife.com. The importance of walking. You have now learned enough to build a solid home that you can always return to when life's changes or the swamp steer you off the path of gratitude and away from God. I truly believe that with consistent, dedicated practice of these simple habits, you will transform your life, your health, your wealth, and your relationships. The transformation happens in time, and as important as it is to see a new perspective right now, it is walking toward it that ultimately gets you there. This is the value of a practice and of your own actions outside of these lessons. A book, a program, a teacher of any kind can only open a door or show you something that you haven't seen before, but it is you that must experience the getting there through action. Now, with this in mind, it's time to arrange all of these pieces for yourself and create your very own daily gratitude practice. Utilize your workbook if you have one, and come up with the top 3 habits that you will use every day for at least 14 days, but hopefully for the rest of your life. From each habit, pick at least one suggested action and design your routine accordingly. In your workbook, you will find a practice log to help you keep track of your first 14 days and several exercises that support the work you've done so far. In the following sections, you will also find a few examples of what a routine might look like. Know that these habits do not live in isolation, but they work together, like logs connecting to create an enclosed structure we call a cabin. Being creative, investing in yourself, and using your skills to do something for others all work together to amplify your appreciation and give you plenty of opportunities for gratitude in life. Likewise, deciding to be spontaneous and going outside, praying, finding that little something, or acknowledging others are all wonderful examples of simple things that can bring you back to a grateful state and a deeper connection to the Creator. Reframing what happens through journaling, and then making a list of what you're grateful for while you're fasting that day can be a great way to get back to the present moment and turn ordinary life into extraordinary living. Lastly, keeping the Sabbath every week will give you an opportunity to practice all of these habits, get closer to God, and look forward to the soon return of Christ. Find how these simple building blocks relate and support one another through your own experimentation, and be purposeful in the creation of your customized routine. It's yours among the many possible ones, and it will be with you for the rest of your life. Enjoy the journey and switch it up every now and then. The guideline is to pick 3 habits on top of keeping the Sabbath, for a total of 4. In reality, you should try to incorporate all of these into your life. The structure is there as a way to help you practice a new way of being, but once you get it, then it becomes part of who you are. Remember that this map and all of its tools are not about getting you anywhere, but rather are guides to a repeated journey that you must continually embark upon beginning today. Examples of daily gratitude practice routines. Routine number 1. Bring to your mind 3 things you're grateful for in the morning and in the evening. Go outside for a 30-minute walk in the morning or the evening. In the evening, journal about 5 things that you're grateful for from that day. Routine number 2. Pray and give thanks in the morning or evening for everything that you have. Try something new every day by changing some aspect of your routine. Put a few dollars into a gratitude jar every day, and at the end of the month, use it for a massage or some similar experience. Every time you put money into the jar, thank God for something in your life, and when you finally spend it, reflect on the experience in your gratitude journal. Routine number 3. Spend at least an hour before or after work dedicated to a project of some kind. This can be an event, a home improvement project, something creative, or a side gig. Schedule time to do absolutely nothing, at least once per day, for a minimum of 15 to 20 minutes. Try a physical, food, or technological fast in some capacity, and reflect about your experience in your gratitude journal. Onward, inward. Now it is time for the next leg of your journey to begin. With your base camp solidified, you will now hunt for the secret weapon and prepare for your final destination at the 3 pillars. Among your arsenal of effective habits, this secret weapon will provide you with the ability to create a virtuous cycle and harness the power of momentum positively, allowing you to continually grow your daily gratitude practice into a bright beacon that lights up the path for others. This secret weapon is not only the key for creating more appreciation, but also for living a fulfilled and happy life as well. When we finally arrive at the 3 pillars, it will be among your main tools in securing long-lasting, abundant relationships with others. So, what is the secret weapon exactly? Look no further than a little courage, and you'll be sure to find it.